Bajirao defeats the Nizam at Palkhed, a place near Aurangabad. It is a completely bloodless battle. He's completely surrounded by the Maratha forces, cut off from his artillery, which is south of the Godavari.
The river.
And the bazaar who has come there before his army reaches, has been chased off from there. He's cut off from all food and water. And within 3 days, the most powerful noble of the Mughals is brought to his knees and he surrenders.
Bajirao entrusted the Peshwa to his younger son, and instead of fighting headlong trying to break the siege, he left Pune with a small army of his small cavalry and attacked Ahmednagar. Then he attacked Burhanpur, the capital of the Mughals here. This forced him to lift the siege and chase him back to his own capital, Aurangabad.
The maritime forts were built by Chhatrapati Shivaji, but Kanhoji Angre went a step further, where he had a coastal fort at every 30 miles, which was the distance you could look through a spyglass.
I am in a panel with such distinguished historians and writers. Dr. Kulkarni, Sohail need no introduction. But what it means by that is, if you have any questions at the end of it all, you know whom to ask. When we talk about the mighty Marathas and the rise of the empire, I'm a landlubber, so I'm going to cover both domains. One thing which makes me very happy these days is the fact that there's such a resurgence of history coming about. There are movies coming on the subject. Books are being written, excellent books are coming up on the subject. But the one concern that is there is the fact that very often, Indians do not respect our history. We do not cherish it, we don't remember it, maybe some of it has been suppressed. Now, the resurgence, especially on the big screen and the small screen, is the other extreme. And the balance lies in understanding and drawing our inferences from what was the correct flow of events. So, when we examine the rise of the mighty Marathas, it was a period covering almost 170 years, starting from the birth of Shivaji in the first decade of the 17th century to its high noon sometime in 1755 or so, and then a gradual decline when the British rules came into India. But gentlemen, when we covered this period, a huge period at which the Marathas at its prime ruled an area, or rather dominated an area from Kandahar to Calcutta. It had established sovereignty over virtually all the kingdoms. Even though one thing not known is, at that time, it was the Mughal emperor. A symbolic emperor, no doubt. Like they say, the rule of Shah Alam is from Delhi to Palam. They had no authority. But in spite of that, the Marathas still upheld that rule. And at the same time, theirs was the first empire to raise the call of Swaraj, which you correctly brought out within India itself. These aspects in terms of land warfare, naval domain, I think as a historian, we have got the best historian on Maratha warfare in the country, both of you, sir. But sir, to you, I'm going to request you, if you could just take the journey of the rise, the plateau of the Marathas and bring it alive to the audience.
Okay, so we've come at a point in the mid 17th century when you find that you've already been under 3 to 4 centuries of Turco-Persian Afghan rule in India. So on the northern side up to the district of Ahmednagar, you can find the Mughals are there spreading downwards. In Shah Jahan's time, Akbar was actually the person who actually attacked Ahmednagar, and Shah Jahan consolidated his rule there. And in the south of the district of Pune, Pune is always in a rebellious district. You find a lot of revolutionaries also coming there. So south of the district of Pune, which was the Jagir of Shahaji Raje, Chhatrapati Shivaji's father. And south of that you had the Bahmani kingdom. Vijayanagar kingdom had been extinguished a few decades earlier, towards the end of the 16th century. So it was between these two big paths that you find sandwiched a small district of Pune, which was where in 1642 Shivaji Raje returned from Bangalore after visiting his father, and he, of course, most of his tutelage was by his mother, Jizabai as she's called. He realized that what he's living under is not a Swarajya, it's a Pararajya. So, as I keep saying in all my talks, is that Swarajya was a word used only twice in our history. Once when Chhatrapati Shivaji decided that this is a Pararajya and I must fight for a Swarajya. And the second time was when Lokmanya Tilak said that. So this was palpably a Pararajya because you had a foreign set of rules, a foreign faith, a foreign language. Persian was the court language. And the jurisprudence was also foreign jurisprudence. So this was what, and there was unfair treatment based on your ethnicity, even in respect of taxes. There were differential rates for octroi. The land revenue was collected in different ways from the farmers. So it was palpably a Pararajya, and that is what he began his fight against. And of course, in the first, say from 1646, when he first formed his seal, it was the first seal in which he created was in Sanskrit, and that itself was a statement by itself. Even his father and his mother had their seals in Persian, so he was the first one to have a Sanskrit seal. And later, in fact, he had a Rajya Vyavahar Kosh by which he tried to weed out Persian words from the Marathi language. And you find a sea change between letters in the Marathi language written in Shahaji Raja's time and towards the end of Chhatrapati Shivaji's rule. All the words, the terminologies, the ministers, the nomenclature was completely changed. So this gives a clear message what his intention was. Till 1656, I would say that the rule of Shivaji Raja was restricted to the district of Pune. Now what happened in 1656? Two things happened in rapid succession. One was the death of the Sultan of Bijapur, and after which there was a bit of a chaos in the south. And Shah Jahan fell ill, and that's kind of set off a war of succession between his sons. So the Viceroy of the Deccan, Aurangzeb, departed for the north to fight with his brothers. And at that point in time was when you find that Shivaji Raja crossing the Sahyadris, entering the Konkan, is where a visionary statement, because we already had the Dutch and the English and the Portuguese with their navies here. In a very visionary act, he decides that he must have a navy. And that is where he actually recruits a father and son, a Portuguese father and son called Vaigas. And with his help, the first 20 ships are built. I call it the first transfer of foreign technology. And the first 20 ships having been built, they already had learned the technology, and subsequently he built another 200 ships. So that was where the the Maratha warships began to build. And he was very clear that that's not the end of the story, because he also invested, for example, when he attacked Surat, which was the Naak of the Mughal Empire at that time. All the money that came from Surat was spent in building seaports, because he realized that the fort of Sindhudurg, for example, was entirely built from money which he got from Surat. So it was not that he built huge palaces which you can admire today and say the magnificent Marathas. Nobody can put that prefix before their names. They used it for building defensive installations. And so the navy was well and truly on its way in the 1660s.
True, I totally agree, sir. But besides the navy, at that time, the campaigns which really brought up the Maratha Empire, the mighty Marathas, were also the land campaigns, largely the land campaigns. And it was that which extended the Marathas all the way to Kandahar, as I brought out to you earlier on. When I speak to the Indian officers, I ask them, who are the greatest maneuverers? They say Patton, Montgomery, etc., etc., etc. I said, who was your guru? The works of Bajirao the First, his battles, Montgomery used to put in his caravan and study it, because he understood it and it's a maneuver warfare which implied fast-moving cavalry hitting hard, reaching half a day's march before your opponent. And this great warrior, we know about his story in Mastani and all, but he was, in terms of tactical knowledge, he was superb. Indian history's greatest failing has been we neglected the concept of maneuver and we neglected our maritime domain. Largely, sir. Both these were addressed by the Marathas. And sir, I'm going to request you all to amplify a little on how the Marathas amplified our maritime domain and the impact it made to us all.
So, of course, it was Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj that built up the navy. And unfortunately, after Shivaji Maharaj, Chhatrapati Shambaji was quite harassed and was unable to continue that focus or able to supply, the navy. And it did take a back seat. And after that, it was Kanhoji Angre, who was a bhakt of Shivaji in the way he led his life. As Dr. Kulkarni just said, that you can call the Marathas brave, courageous, but they did not waste their money on baubles or palaces. So it was, there was no waste of resources. And of course, the maritime forts were built by Chhatrapati Shivaji, but Kanhoji Angre went a step further, where he had a coastal fort at every 30 miles, which was the distance you could look through a spyglass. So he had eyes on the entire coast. And he used the template of Shivaji Maharaj and was able to successfully control the entire Konkan, more or less.
Superb. Thank you. You brought the coastal forts. Like I said, I'm a landlubber amongst the sea of whites. Ladies and gentlemen, especially the young people, see the sighting of the forts on land. See how Singhad is sighted. How they are they are masterpieces in military sighting, where they dominate the entire area. And that's exactly what you brought out in the coastal sighting as well, sir.
Right, and it was also his ability to differentiate between terrestrial tactics and naval tactics. He had a dedicated navy, and one must understand it was a feudal system. One bought commissions even then. He was possibly the only person who spent his own money on practice, and it was nothing is, that's how you perfect anything. And I think the Navy knows that and has been practicing that. If you do not have these war games or, it is rusty.
So what you're saying is, had they not built it up in the manner they did, we may not have been sitting here like this today. Sir, thank you. Sir, another thing I want to bring up is when you brought up the rise of the Maratha Empire and its abrupt, I won't call it downfall, its abrupt blip in the Battle of Panipat, the third Battle of Panipat. It was an event which was the blackest day of Indian history. I mean, the flower of the Maratha youth fell in the field of Panipat. So could you just bring out that battle, the events leading to it, and the impact it had on the mighty Maratha Empire, sir? And how did we recover from that?
Actually, the Battle of Panipat is a much later event, I would say. So, by the time Chhatrapati Shivaji died in 1680, he coronated himself, which was a very seminal event for the times of those times, because it was the first time a king had been coronated and declared himself to be a sovereign king amongst the polity of kings in India. And that was a very epochal event at that time. He died 6 years after that, but not before having extended his kingdom and his empire right up to the Kaveri. For example, with a certain amount of foresight, he reinforced the fort of Jinji, which was to serve him in good stead in the years to come. So 2 years after his death in 1682, it was Aurangzeb's son Akbar who actually rebelled against his father and lost the battle somewhere in Rajasthan. And he was told that the only person who can protect you now is Chhatrapati Sambhaji. So he comes down, I'm sure some of you must have seen the movie. I have not seen it, but so he comes down to the Deccan and he comes to Chhatrapati Sambhaji, who for a while he stays with him. They have a few campaigns, and then he decides that I'm going towards Iran to escape my father. And 1682 to 1707, for 25 long years, you find Aurangzeb leaving his capital of Delhi and Agra and coming to the Deccan. And the last 25 years of this person, out of the 50-year reign that he had, was spent here in Deccan trying to suppress. In the first 2 years, he suppressed the kingdom of Bijapur. The 2 years after that, he suppressed the kingdom of Golconda. And then in 1689, he manages to capture Chhatrapati Sambhaji and puts him to a cruel death. So at that point in time, probably Aurangzeb would be justified in thinking that my work here is done. I've extinguished 3 powers, got rid of 3 rulers. But the grassroots momentum that the Marathas built up, they did not anymore require a person to direct them to do something. So Chhatrapati Sambhaji's brother, he was sent down deep south into Jinji, and the Mughals placed the fort of Jinji under a siege which went on for 8 long years. This 8 long year siege ended in 1698, during which a person sitting at Vishalgarh fort near Kolhapur called Hukumat Panna Ramchandra Pant, he was directing the forces of the Marathas. Santaji, Dhanaji, these are all household names in Maharashtra. They were leading the battle against the Mughals. And the Mughal generals were tired of fighting. They kept telling the Wazir and all the Sardars kept telling the Badshah that let's go back to Delhi, our work here is done. While he kept on plodding from one fort to the other, at times bribing the Marathas to hand over the fort. The Marathas took the money, gave the fort, immediately his back was turned, they went back and took the fort back. So this cycle went on till he realized when he finally retired to Ahmednagar in 1705 with the Maratha armies crowding around his camp, that practically I have lost the battle, I have lost the war. And he dies in 1707 and immediately another battle of succession begins. His son who was with him again goes to the north to fight with his brothers, and that is what the momentum which the Marathas had built up in this long 25-year war, which actually ravaged the Deccan. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, and that is when they surged northwards, crossed the Narmada, entered Malwa, and over the next few years you find that in 12 years after the death of Aurangzeb, you find the first Maratha army of 30,000 strong people in Delhi.
Absolutely, sir.
So in 1719, they not only get because 30 long years, Chhatrapati Sambhaji's queen is imprisoned by the Mughals. She is released in 1719. Some other family members were there. They are released. They get the 3 orders that the Swaraj of Chhatrapati Shivaji, the Chauthai of the 6 districts, the Subas of the south, and the Sardeshmukh, which is 10% revenue. Of these Subas, the Mughal emperor delegates to the Marathas, tells them these are yours. So that is the first incursion of the Marathas in Delhi in 1719. And as you see, the Maratha Empire extended to 1818. So I prefer to call this period the Maratha century, from the mid 17th century to the end of the 18th century.
You have given wonderful insights, but what I am bringing up is the manner in which the Maratha Empire rose to the point it reached a stage where it became a clash of empires between the Durrani Empire in Afghanistan and the rising Maratha Empire in India, with a whole bunch of states, the Nawabs of North India, the Rajputs, the Jats in between, sir.
Actually, there is it's like a Game of Thrones which happened after that. So in 1720, you find after getting these sanas, Bajirao becomes the Peshwa. And he's just a 19-year-old boy at that time, and there's a lot of doubt whether he'll be able to really conduct himself as a prime minister. And Chhatrapati Shahu, who's Chhatrapati Sambhaji's son, who's a ruling monarch, he said if he doesn't acquit himself well, we can always get rid of this guy and put somebody else in his place. But so, sure enough, in a matter of few years, the Nizamul Mulk, who has come to Hyderabad, and he tries to take control of the Marathas here. See, the Marathas are land and a sea-based power. So, you cannot avoid discussing the mighty Marathas without coming to the land prowess. So the Nizam decides that he's going to take both the Satara and Kolhapur kingdoms and under his wing and become the ruler of the Deccan himself. And that leads to the Battle of Palkhed, which is what you were talking about.
Yes.
So 1728, in this month, Bajirao defeats the Nizam at Palkhed, a place near Aurangabad. It is a completely bloodless battle. He is completely surrounded by the Maratha forces, cut off from his artillery, which is south of the Godavari.
The river.
And the bazaar who has come there before his army reaches, has been chased off from there. He is cut off from all food and water. And within 3 days, the most powerful noble of the Mughals is brought to his knees and he surrenders.
And that too, gentlemen, without a shot being fired. This was one of the greatest battles of maneuver fought on Indian soil.
So that is what Montgomery calls a masterpiece in strategic mobility. The 7-8 month long campaign, the maneuvers which took place.
In the Battle of Maneuver, what was done was he had attacked Pune. He had laid siege to Pune, hoping that he'll draw the much smaller Maratha army out. Bajirao entrusted the Peshwa to his younger son, and instead of fighting headlong trying to break the siege, he left Pune with a small army of his small cavalry and attacked Ahmednagar. Then he attacked Burhanpur, the capital of the Mughals here. This forced him to lift the siege and chase him back to his own capital, Aurangabad. And as they say, he continued moving, Bajirao the first with the Maratha army, half a day's march ahead of the pursuing Mughals, along a route which made them cross rivers. The rivers were telling, because each time they crossed a river, the Mughals had to leave behind a percentage of their heavy artillery and their heavy equipment, which was their strength. He continued, took them on a wild goose chase and came back towards Aurangabad. And there, sir, you bought out. He crossed the Palkhed river. The Mughals laid chase. When 2/3 of the army was across the Palkhed river, the Marathas came from behind the river line, cut them off between the river line and the mountains ahead, and they made them surrender without a shot. Gentlemen, that is maneuver.
So the story continues that the very next year you find that Bajirao's brother enters Malwa, defeats the Mughal governor there, and de facto Indore, Ujjain, Dhar, these places are taken over, and de facto they take over the province of Malwa, which is very important strategically because it connects Hindustan to the Deccan. The areas east of it were all thick forests and nobody could pass through them. So if you had to go to the north or come to the south, Malwa was a very strategic located Suba. So that is when the Marathas first took over it, and they demanded that the emperor hand over the sanad, or the pass on the government transfer of power of the Malwa area to them. And towards that you find that Bajirao makes his first attack on Delhi, and that attack in 1737 is an attack on Delhi after nearly 180 years that an enemy power actually reaches the doorstep of the Mughal capital. And from there he returns. Nadir Shah comes to Delhi 2 years later and he ravages the whole place. But in 1741 the Sanad of Malwa is handed over to the Marathas and they become the de jure rulers of that province. So that is where we come till the year 1741, and that is when a whole lot of complex events start taking place all over India. In the south you find the Anglo-French rivalry begins, where the French at Pondicherry and the English at Madras, they are fighting with each other. In the north you find the one by one the rulers like the Nizamul Mulk dies in the south, his children start fighting with each other. Sawai Jai Singh of Jaipur dies, his two sons start fighting with each other for the succession battle. Jodhpur is fighting with the Marathas. Safdarjung, who is the Wazir in Delhi, he is not on good terms with the Rohilas. He has a battle with the Rohilas. And at each of these places you find the Marathas are summoned for help. And therefore you find in the succession of Jaipur, for example, the Holkar army is supporting Madho Singh, who eventually wins the battle and becomes the king. But in the process, when the return has to be made to Holkar for the items promised to him, when that was not done, that leads to a perpetual enmity between Jaipur and Holkar out of the rest of the Maratha power. Similar things happen in the south, for example, the famous victory which the English historians talk about, Clive goes and captures Arcot from the French army there. Very few people know that a Maratha chief in the south called Murarao Ghorpade actually helps Clive to do that. So that is not recorded because the British are writing the history of the period. In the northern fear, when Safdarjung is defeated by the Rohilas, Safdarjung's Wakils come to Jaipur and ask the Maratha Wakils to come north and help him. So Holkar and Scindia go to help Safdarjung defeat the Rohilas.
Sir, you're
so the
right.
Rohilas are...
In fact, at that time, it was the Marathas who were the kingmakers and the enforcers in more ways than one.
So that is how the Rohilas are defeated. Safdarjung is put back on the Wazir's place. Safdarjung signs a treaty with the Marathas that you will protect the Delhi emperor against all his enemies. And that is how they are committed to the defense of Delhi and the defense of the emperor against all his enemies, whether within the court or outside the court.
Yes, sir.
2 years later, there is a falling out between the emperor and his Wazir. And the Marathas are called to put the Wazir in his place. They defeat Safdarjung, push him out to Awadh. So another enemy created in the north was Awadh. 1753, the Maratha army goes north because the aim was always to capture Delhi. On the way, they come across the Jat kingdom of Surajmal. At Kumbher, they surround the fort. Mallara Holkar's son is killed by a cannonball coming from the fort. And Mallarao becomes a sworn enemy of Surajmal at that time. And sure enough, the king actually from Delhi comes out to help Surajmal. The Marathas go there, they remove the king from his place and put...
Sir, is the fact that the Marathas in their role as being kingmakers has actually ended up antagonizing so many of the smaller kingdoms which are out there, which is very telling, which is one of the reasons why they were not helped so much when the final conflict
came. And in
came.
all the midst of this, you find that from Ahmad Shah Abdali has begun his invasion 1747, 1748, 1752, 1757, and eventually the Marathas are called upon to defend North India and Delhi from the invasions of Ahmad Shah Abdali. And Ahmad Shah Abdali by that time has built a coalition with the Nawab of Awadh, the Rohilas, the Rajputs who remain aloof but who are in correspondence with Abdali himself. You find that nobody is there to ally with the Marathas when they go out to Panipat. That leads to the battle of Panipat.
Sir, in your own book, in fact the book I have here is Your own book, sir. There's a line out there. The Marathas had not a single friend north of the Narmada. So when Ahmad Shah Abdali, with his coalition of the Nawabs of North India, actually came into conflict, into battle with them. I mean, it was almost 2 years of campaigning. But when they finally made battle on the 14th of January 1761, in the darkest day of Indian history, that slaughter which took place of the Marathas at that time was because they had been rendered friendless virtually across North India. Also, they had moved from Pune to Panipat to North India, and as a military man, you'll say, they were at the extreme edge of their logistical and operational reach. And sir, that defeat, if we may call it that, I mean, we all know the extent of it. In today, we have an expression in Marathi, we say, Panipat Zala, a great catastrophe has taken place. That, I would say, a plummeting of Maratha power. But sir, did we recover from that after that? And how did the Marathas recover?
There was a big debacle because an entire generation of entire leadership was erased from there. You find that when Madhavrao came to power, not only did he try to build up the navy, but he also sent his armies, captured Delhi back in 1771, put back the absentee empire on the throne in 72. And almost till 1803, you find that Delhi is in the hands of Mahadji Scindia and his son Daulat Rao. So if Delhi was taken by the British, it was taken from Marathas, not from the Mughals. If you go to Noida golf course, there's a big, huge memorial there which has been put up, which describes the Battle of Patparganj. At that time, probably Noida was part of that area. And it describes how the British forces under Lord Lake defeated the Marathas and took Delhi from the Marathas. So the whole concept of the Mughals leading to a British rule is a kind of a anachronism in history.
Sir, may I ask you, Sohail, I would ask you a very interesting what-if question.
Right.
We've spoken so much of the Battle of Panipat, the Third Battle of Panipat. What if that battle had not taken place? Or what if the Marathas had won at Panipat? How do you think history would have taken a turn?
I think Dr. Kulkarni would better serve that question. But as far as the Maratha maritime effort went, it did reach its pinnacle under Bajirao's brother and Kanhoji Angre's son when they basically eliminated Portuguese rule in the northern Konkan by taking Bassein. I think the Indian Empire, under the Marathas, would have flourished. With the Angre is still there, as Mr. Sanyal earlier pointed out, that their focus was on this maritime position. You know, now we're in the midst of the Kumbh Mela, and the 4 drops of Amrit that went north, you know, we can posit quite frankly that the Samudra Manthan happened outside the Konkan. You know, if the first spot was Nasik and then Ujjain and then eventually Hardwar. So Kanhoji Angre was well aware that not only that the horse and Lakshmi Devi came out of the Samudra Manthan. And so there was a great focus by Chhatrapati Shivaji and the Angres later on our maritime effort, and he made sure they always welcomed traders at their own terms, and they were able to control those traders in their lifetimes. It was only after the fall of Vijayadur that...
Yes, I know. You're right. I mean, maritime we could have grown, but the question which I asked was, had the Marathas won the Third Battle of Panipat, how do you envisage the history of India as such would have changed? You know, one major change would have taken place. The British would not have been allowed that open entry into India that they did. They would have been a power strong enough to withstand them. Yes. After that, what twists and turns take place, I have no idea. Sir, you might be able to give a better insight on that. But yeah, we would have been able to resist imperial influence far longer than we did. It was the one power that could have withstood it.
Actually, the two principal opponents in Panipat were the Afghans and the Marathas. And at the end of the battle, though Ahmad Shah Abdali has won the battle, it yielded him nothing. He went back to Afghanistan, never to come back to Delhi. As far as the Marathas was concerned, for a time they came back down the Chambal. And it was during those 8 years before they came back to Delhi that you find that from the Battle of Plassey and the Battle of Buxar, which Shujauddaulah fought against the English, which the English entered into Awadh, and actually Awadh became a client state of the English. So by the time the Marathas came back, the English had been well and truly entrenched in that region, though they took a longer time to advance to Delhi, another 40 years. But that is the time when they advanced. There was a vacuum created, the power vacuum in the north, because all the principal princes at that time had been defeated, or they had been tired of war, and Abdali went back and Marathas came down, and there was a vacuum. The emperor himself was not sitting in Delhi. He was sitting in asylum with the English in Allahabad. So Delhi was a capital without a king for a fairly long time, until the Marathas restored him in 1772. From 1757 to 1772, 15 long years, the emperor was not in Delhi. So you find that vacuum is what the English actually took advantage
And exploited. Yeah, true. There's another one unanswered question. Like it was brought out, the Marathas did raise the banner of nationalism. Swaraj was raised for the first time here. And simply, in a nutshell, it was India for Indians. Everyone else were outsiders. The Mughals were outsiders. Everyone else was outsiders. But the surprising part was, even though this was a rallying call that should have united everybody, the Marathas somehow could not get win over the Rajputs, the Jats, or any of the kingdoms on their sides. Why was this antagonism towards them?
Actually, in each instance, there is a story which goes behind why it happened, why relations. During Savai Jai Singh's time, the relations between Bajirao and him were very good. Savai Jai Singh was actually promoting Bajirao's interests in the court at Delhi. It was only the succession battle that took place between his sons, where the Marathas had to take one side. I mean, they took one side, and they helped one son to take the throne of Jaipur, and against which they were supposed to be paid some amount of money for the labor they had undertaken and so on, which they didn't get. And that led to a perpetual kind of a demand on the state of Jaipur to pay those reparations of war, which were not paid. So that these things happened in a recurring fashion. And ultimately the aim, in fact, there's a letter by Chhatrapati Rajaram written in 1698, where he says, I have kept aside 6 lakh rupees, 6 lakh hones at that time. 2 lakh will be paid to the person who captures the capital Raigad. 2 lakh hones will be paid to the person who captures Daulatabad. And 2 lakh hones will be paid to the person who captures Delhi. So Delhi was always the aim for the Marathas, and the intervening powers who were there they either had to subjugate them and make them their subordinates in their march towards Delhi. And there's something, a concept which has been floated by a British author called Randolph Cooper, called the South Asian military economy. And the military economy meaning that it was a preferred place to seek employment. People who came back from agriculture and came back to fight a war, they preferred to take up a job with the Marathas because they're the biggest employers at that time. In 1803, you find in the Second Anglo-Maratha War, was taken over by the British. They became the biggest employers, the most attractive employers.
And they paid regularly.
But the point is this, that today, suppose you're working in a multinational company or you're working in an Indian company, you don't consider it an anti-national act to take up a job with a multinational company.
Absolutely.
So you can't blame the people who took up employment in the armies of the East India Company because they got better terms.
Exactly, like most Indians did at that point of time.
They didn't think ahead that this is going to lead to loss of freedom, which happened much later.
So, now one last question before I take on questions from the audience. We have spoken so much about the Maratha warriors. Could you enlighten us on the naval warrior, Angre?
Under Chhatrapati Shivaji, there was Menak Bhandari and Darya Sarang, and after him, it was Kanhoji Angre, who remained undefeated. One of the very few people in history that have remained undefeated in, warfare. And he was undefeated, and he was also a very good employer. How the EIC was later on, everyone worked for the Angres because they paid higher and better employers, more opportunity for progress. So I think Kanhoji Angre always kind of misses the mark, has been slipped through the fingers of history and fame. Thanks to the Navy. It's the Navy who has remembered him and kept his memory alive.
Thank you very much for the insights you have given us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And I truly hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Sohail.